Welcome to Podsauce. All right, we got a little fun one for you. I think you're gonna like this, Leash.
The actor in me deeply appreciates. Deeply appreciates.
Deeply appreciates. We're gonna bring on Michael Stein, who's got a podcast called Long Shot Leaders. And I was listening to this podcast this morning. It was a really fascinating interview, but I'm gonna throw it over to Michael first because I want to hear what his explanation is of what this podcast is about. So give me a good 30-second brief introduction to your podcast for someone who may not have listened to it before.
Okay, well, I do a podcast called Long Shot Leaders because I consider myself a long shot. I come from a long line of long shots. My grandmother escaped the Russian concentration camps on her way to America. My dad was a New York homeless street kid, became a multimillionaire only to become homeless again. I was a long shot. I was born premature, health issues, ADHD, dyslexia. They put me in UCLA for an all school when I was a kid. I didn't know why, for special needs. And basically, I didn't find any success until making people laugh. You know, I started doing stand-up comedy when I was 19, had a lot of failures and successes that we can get into, but overcoming, large obstacles to find success seems to be in my DNA.
I think one thing that I really love about your podcast, Michael, is that we all know that the path to success is not linear. It has the ebbs and the flows, and even in your bio, you give such a beautiful breakdown of, at this juncture in my life, I endured this, and at this juncture. And so being able to speak to actors, creators, directors, and find out about various points in their lives, how they got around those obstacles. How important to you was it, obviously, to create a podcast like this, especially during the pandemic?
Well, I wanted to do it before, and I said, what kind of podcast would I do, right? So I knew, as being a stand-up comedian, actor and a filmmaker, and when you write, a screenplay, everything always centers around write what you know, talk about what you know, really get to the heart of the matter, the truth, as much as it hurts, especially when you're a stand-up comedian. At least the stand-up comedians I like Richard Pryor and Robin Williams, Billy Crystal, those guys, they bare their soul. You can't have too much pride. So I wanted to dig in deep and talk about, especially if you're going to do something talking about failure and success, that yin and the yang of that. I had to own my own. So I, talked about everything and anything that I thought would be valuable, that was good and bad. There's some things I didn't talk about, I run a company, but, for the most part, I bare my soul. And I think that's, giving value. And it's, that's the thing I would want to hear. I want to hear like total transparency from a comedian or a podcast or whatever.
All right, so I want to give you some props for the episode that I listened to. I listened to the one, it's pretty recent. It was about a Emmy award-winning producer who was basically giving birth and died on the operating table during the C-section because she had some rare condition, and for 37 seconds was gone. And you talked to her all about this experience. How did you find her? How did this interview land in your lap?
I think I found her on Podmatch. So there's there's services, there's Podmatch, there's Podcaster, I don't know, there's like several different connections, but I think I found her, a formal way. And, I look for those kind of stories. I'll look for, somebody that is, that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, to do what she, and she also had some other stuff to overcome in her personal life. So, and I just found her interesting, so I wanted to be able to interview somebody like her, and that's how I found her, through a formal source.
You have an episode that's around the 48 Laws of Power. Now, I want to talk to you about that outside of this podcast space, because as someone who has had, and still operating within the Hollywood scheme, we all know that it can feel very angular. And so I personally have a slight issue with the 48 Laws of Power. How do you, coming away from that interview, did you walk away feeling like this is a structure that people should subscribe to, or how do you, or just bring more of your authenticity to the table, and then that will make room for you, that and your gifts?
This is a great question, and I will tell you why. Because the 48 Laws of Power can be used for good or for evil. We talked about on that episode.
Yeah.
I talked about this with my wife and my kids. I've read the book since, I think it was 2001. I've always visited back to it. I contacted Robert Greene because we have mutual Facebook friends, and that's how I got him to be on the show. So 48 Laws of Power, I was just telling somebody got the book, that, it was a younger person that I know. And I said to my wife, I was like, boy, I really wish she maybe took some personal development courses before he reads the book, and that's because if you don't understand or have a good grasp of, self-inventory, why people do what they do, why you do what you do, some type of modicum of like education and personal development, you might look at the 48 laws and you can just, kind of get the wrong idea about them. So the reason why Peter Green, Peter Green's an actor, reason why Robert Greene wrote that book is because he worked in Hollywood and he was downtrodden by these, I don't know, demagogues. I mean, I don't know what you want to call them. I mean, I've been called a Hollywood catfly, really, right?
Yeah.
So he was so downtrodden by that. Plus, he also had like 80 jobs before he was a writer, and he was so beaten down by employers that he was always a historian. He was a great student, that it came inherent in him to write, the underdog story about these 48 laws. And he had landed on 48 because I guess that exhausted, really, he couldn't really think of another.
Yeah, that's a different perspective to look at it from. Sorry, that's definitely a different perspective to come at the 48 laws of power, because I definitely have always had this thing about it. Maybe just being from the South, you and I, before the cameras were rolling, both, talked about you're in Texas now, I'm from Texas, and there's just a different way that we go about things where even when you do your own introspective work, still having to operate within the Hollywood scheme and wanting to do it with some integrity, that it can sometimes, some of the laws can make you feel like, is that on the up and up? It feels very angular, so, yeah.
There's so much to be, that is a really, so much dynamics we can get into as far as like, coming from a smaller town or a smaller area or outside of a bigger city, the dynamics of Hollywood, the psychology behind it is very dynamic, different than, any other city, even New York, which my parents are from. So, and Hollywood, particularly the small portion of LA, doesn't encapsulate the whole city. It's just, that culture.
Right. It is a culture, and in some degree a clique.
Yeah.
So, Michael, you've had a lot of people on your podcast as guests, very successful people, CEOs, filmmakers, drug dealers, international talk show hosts.
Wait, that pivot from CEOs to
you could be very successful drug dealer.
That's true.
No, I guess you've got over 100 episodes, and if someone was going to check out your podcast for the first time, is there an episode that you would say, this one was great, check this one out, it is my gold standard of an episode?
Well, that's so hard to say, because these are all, they become, for me, I handpick each one of these. We do 3 episodes a week, but I handpick each one. So it's like, really, I love each one of these people. But for the most part, I can't really think of one person yet, knock on wood, that I really
You've got to have a favorite child, even though you don't want to say it.
I do.
Who's your favorite child?
I wouldn't say favorite, but I will say the most impacting, and it's a no-brainer, and that's a 92-year-old Ben Lesser, Holocaust survivor. I really, I'm Jewish. I really wanted to make this an important podcast. I told my daughter, this is like really important to me. I planned for it. The intro is 7.5 minutes long. My intros are usually like maybe 25, 30 seconds, depending on the guest, how much do you need to explain. But, they're not really making any more Holocaust survivors anymore. I grew up with that kind of rhetoric, because of my grandmother surviving the Russian concentration camps. It's something that, I had to sleep in the same room with my grandmother until I was 9 years old, so there's a long story there. But hearing that story, and talking to him, very emotional, very important to me, so that's the most impacting. But there's other ones that, stand out where, somebody was wrongfully jailed when they were 17 years old or 16 years old, and they spent 16 years in jail. And then they found the DNA, and he was innocent, and that's a Tour de France of like hell. And there's just a lot of other of those stories, but the most impacting, I'd say, would be Ben Lesser, 92-year-old Holocaust survivor.
Wow. I will listen to that episode.
Yeah.
I can't get enough. I'm also Jewish, and I cannot get enough of those stories. I try to take them in.
Yeah.
I've been at dinners where relatives are there, and I am glued to every word coming out of their mouth, because what they lived through, such fascinating, horrible stories. So I will check out the Ben Lesser episode.
I don't do any talk. I barely do any talking during the interview.
Fair.
I just do a long intro. I do a pretty much short outro, And he's like I say it before it starts, I say he's like an elegant, riding horse. You ever go horseback riding? He just he's told the story so many times, because he wants to record it for, historical reasons, that he just led the story. It was 2 hours. My podcasts are usually 30 to 40 minutes. It was 2.5 hours. And I knew it was going to be long, kind of like a Holocaust documentaries are long, so I just took my time with that.
I'm going to definitely check that episode out. Is he still with us?
Yeah, I'm going to have him back for the 1 year anniversary.
Okay. And the podcast that you did with the wrongfully imprisoned person, are they of color?
No, they're not. They I don't know. They're Caucasian, but
and I only ask because it's not often that you
Caucasian.
hear a wrongfully,
Right.
jailed white person, for an extended period of time. Usually that's something that, unfortunately, is very prevalent within the African American community, just due to not being able to get bail and all of those other things. We are a podcast discovery show. If you could give us, what recommendations would you give our listeners and our viewers for podcasts to check out?
I wish I had something that was original. I have a lot of people that do podcasts that were on my show, but the podcasts I listen to I listen to Mark Maron, I listen to John Lee Dumas, who's been on my show, Entrepreneurs on Fire, because I'm an entrepreneur. Yeah. I listen to Mike Stelzner, marketing, because I do the marketing for my company. So I'm very practical in the podcasts I listen to. And I listen to those, I'll also those. Then there's Neil Patel. I listen to his podcast too. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Neil Patel. He's a marketing guy.
What's the name of his podcast? Do you remember?
Oh God, I forgot of it. It's on my thing. Yeah, it's funny because the episodes are maybe like 2.5, 3 minutes long, but they just they just do real fast. Yeah.
Yes.
That's right up Dax's alley. Dax
I'll
needs
listen
it,
to
like,
4
short and
episodes
sweet.
and be done.
Yeah, I mean it's great because you're just they're getting to the point really quick with marketing, and they're latest on the marketing, and it's great. Yeah, it's good stuff.
So I have one last question for you before we have to go. But how do you decide if someone is interesting enough to have on your podcast? Because I got to imagine there's a lot of people out there. You're putting out numerous podcasts a week, so you're getting a lot of people in. But what is it about them that goes, okay, this person is to the quality that I want to hear their story?
I look for the arc. It's like if I'm writing a screenplay, so it's the same thing. So if I'm going to, find a guest, like Michael, what kind of, what was there a moral need? Was there a character arc, that you can build on? Was there something inhibiting, a want that they had? Was there an inciting incident? Was there a moment where they stepped into Oz, where their world changed forever? Was there a new equilibrium changed, after they, went through the Tour de France of the hardship that they had to go through? What was the new equilibrium? What's the skill set afterwards we can, get into afterwards? I look for all those key bullet points. Like it just comes inherent to me to and I can look at somebody's bio within a minute and kind of see if that arc is there. And that's kind of what I look for. Like a Save the Cat, John Truby's story structure kind of, story, whatever I could attach to that person.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Michael. And if people want to check out his podcast, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put up a link to his podcast, Long Shot Leaders, on podsauce.com, and you can go there, check it out. And you know what? If we can, maybe we'll do a direct link to the Ben episode, because I think that is one that really caught my attention, and I bet it will catch a lot of other people's attention out there as well.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael. And guys, don't you go anywhere. We have more. This is Podsauce.